Talking of whispers, I recommend a long read article in The Guardian about Adam Tooze, the economic
I have just
historian.
read it 2 days
Ah,
ago.
okay.
I just
There you
read
go.
that, especially that article. Yes, it's interesting.
Yeah, I don't know. I listen to his podcast. I have his chart book on my subscription list. It's he's quite interesting character. But the article was quite unusual, and also the criticism of him from the New Left Review. There's also
Yes.
something what I tangentially follow. I have to say, I'm not a
Yeah.
diehard fan or subscriber to the New
In
Left
the
Review.
article was also quite good about. I do not follow the person regularly and systematically, like listening to his podcast regularly. But I think the article was pretty nicely highlighting that some of his messages through time might be inconsistent. So he is pretty much also a lot of times adopting new insights and then changing his own
mind. Yeah. I had a friend who used to say that changing your mind should be a basic human right.
That's a good point because like I think that's becoming a commonplace for politicians, but I also think for intellectuals and so they don't need to be wedded to a single thing. Now, of course, one should not go into relativism, but that's a different story. Anyway, we can start it.
Welcome to OTT Talks, a series of conversations with think tankers, policymakers, and experts around the world. This episode is part of a series of discussions with European think tank leaders to reflect on the nature of their work in a rapidly changing continent. My name is Enrique Mendizabal, and I am co-hosting this session with Goran Buldioski. Today, we have the honor of having Petra Reszkető with us. But first, Goran, why don't you set the scene for our discussion today?
Thank you, Enrique. I'm really pleased that we are continuing with the third season of this series. You and I have really enjoyed across the first 8 episodes. Speaking with various think tank leaders across Europe, and I was really encouraged with the excellent response that we got from the field of people who follow, support think tankers, and really care about the independent policy research. In those episodes, we spoke with a really diverse group of European think tank leaders. We went west, east, south, and so we tried to touch upon various types of organizations. In this series, actually, we agreed to focus on a specific type of organization, which is the economic think tanks. This first episode in this new series, we hope to be one out of 4, where we will look at various think tank leaders of economic think tanks across Europe. In Europe, as we know, economic think tanks have a long tradition. Unlike some other fields, they also have a tradition both in academia and in the state institutions, be that ministries, national banks, or various state-supported economic institute. But also, Europe is home to a wide range of independent economic think tanks that work across various disciplines in what is becoming a really vast area of economic analysis. Many of those, especially those in Eastern Europe, balance the work between consulting, national government, national institutions, and businesses with the more publicly available policy research that is often supported either by state, by international organizations, or private foundations. In this series, similar to the previous 2, what we really try to do is explore and see what's distinctive and maybe what's common about the economic think tanks compared to the other organizations, and as well to learn what does it take to lead a think tank. With that, Enrique, back to you to introduce our today's guest.
Thank you, Goran, and I'm really happy about this interview, this episode, because I met Petra now more than 10 years ago, and I was lucky enough to visit Petra and her colleagues at the Budapest Institute, at least briefly. So after this introduction to the series, let me welcome our guest. Petra is a founder and executive partner, as well as senior researcher in the Budapest Institute. Founded in 2008, the Budapest Institute has a double mission. First, to contribute to public policy making grounded in evidence to benefit both Hungary and Europe. And secondly, to promote the evidence-based approach in public discourse and policy debate. The Institute operates primarily in the areas of employment and social policy, Roma integration, education policy, business environment, and good governance. And Petra's own expertise is in inclusive entrepreneurship, SME policies, open and participatory public governance, measuring government efficiency, social integration of vulnerable groups, program evaluation, and regulatory impact assessment. So, perfect guest for the start of this series. Petra, welcome. It's really great to see you again.
Thank you very much for this kind invitation. I'm pleased to chat with you.
Petra, great to have you on this episode, and great to reconnect. As you and our listeners know, my connection with Hungary is really long standing. So, as many think tankers and supporters of think tankers tune in to listen to these episodes, we like to start more by briefly describing the political context in which your think tank operates. So, perhaps if you can briefly explain what's the context in which you operate at the moment, and how is to be part of that political and economic context in Hungary today.
Yes, thank you. And definitely context gives our opportunities and limits at the same time. So let's just start with that. So as you may know, and many of the people listening may know, Hungary is an interesting country. Challenging in many ways regarding how usually democratic institutions are working. We have for the last 16 years one dominant party in government. They have launched many systematic changes throughout the last 1.5 decade. And at the end of the day, basically, to use the very typical adjective, as also our prime minister describes our country, this is an illiberal democracy, however paradox it may sound, which means that basically by now, so I'm going very much in medias res, we have a very picky and limited contact with our government, I mean the Budapest Institute. We are here for doing policy research and analysis, but usually public authorities in Hungary work pretty much behind closed doors and even more darker and black. They are even more black boxes than they have been 30 years ago or 25 years ago, first of all. And secondly, many of the evidence-based inputs we might produce, there is this expectation that due to the lack of transparency of cross-sectoral collaborations, whatever it is, experts and governments or civil sector and government. So due to the lack of that transparency, any policy evidence which people like us may deliver, it is not clear how it is narrated, used, and then basically applied. There are high limits about or expected good impact, which definitely demotivates a lot of people like us. So basically, by now, in Hungary, we are active, but I had to admit that we are strategically very selective what kind of public policy consultancy projects we are taking on board and we are engaging with because of this negative expectations or risk, and also political risk that might be adjoined in these collaborations. But secondly, also, let's talk about the larger regional context. I think all of these countries are facing big changes, and the European Union itself, which turned to be our main, basically, market for our activities, which was a strategic choice by us even before the political changes in Hungary occurred. So when we established the Budapest Institute in 2008, we have already announced for ourselves or put the mission for ourselves that we would like to be the regional policy institute and not the Hungarian one. So we kind of started building up a long-term step-by-step process about how to build up and join and collect references, policy program evaluation, policy consultancy, policy analytical references beyond Hungary. And definitely our competitive advantage were in the region. So we had tried sequentially extending our network of partners from the Central and Eastern European region, and also very much going and applying for projects which are covering this region more and more. And as far as we see, that is, by now, again, coming back to our days, the region is very able, very volatile. There are some policy fields which are pretty much pushed, also with the backwaters of the European Union, priority areas of the European Commissions, like, youth policy, employment policy, sometimes even going beyond specific target groups. But it is very much changing in the specific countries, like in the Visegrad region or in the region, which ones are taken on board by their by their ruling governments. So there is always a kind of puzzle when we are setting up partnerships and picking up topics, because we have to really count with this variability in the political priorities and with the basically demand side of our policy evidence market.
Petra, before we go into detail about Budapest Institute, I have if you can really in a couple of sentences satisfy a bit my curiosity. You mentioned, illiberal democracy. Where is the place of economic analysis in the illiberal democracy?
Yeah, this is also something which has been in a lot of change for the last couple of years. I mean, there were policy consultancy or even policy analytical institutions before. This party took the government in 2010. However, not much. I mean, when we established the Budapest Institute in 2008, that was one of the reasons why we established this institute, because we haven't found really our place. Usually standard division of the market was that you have academicians, high-level researchers who are sometimes reaching out to policy questions and issues and running some consultancy or research projects, but they are basically academicians. And the other side, or the other extreme point of that time market, was basically the big consultancy firms like, Deloitte and KPMG and Ernst & Young, and there was nothing in between. So that was basically the impulse for us also to establish our own institute, because there was a niche between these two. And the academic approach is very important in many policy questions, but sometimes, the feasibilities, the relevance, the adequacy of the main questions, and even the how far you are concluding your project with viable and feasible policy recommendations. Sometimes academic research does not get to that point, or very rarely. I would rather put it in a positive way. You need a lot of extra information, and also you need the understanding of how public policy making and the logic of public policy making works. And that's what we felt like we had, because some of us from the funders also, we have been working in public administration, so we understood that logic. We felt like we are understanding that logic, and we are also understanding their language. We are understanding the stakeholders. We know who are the stakeholders. We know what could be their motivation. So all of these additional things which are definitely necessary to make any suggestions to turn any policy suggestions into a policy recommendation, which are adequate and relevant. We felt like we have something more as compared to academic field, as compared to people coming from academic field. In turn, in comparison to the big four companies, we felt like our methodologies, we use data analytical approach, and the robustness of our methodologies is better and also more convincing and more adapt. So basically that was the starting point. And then after the political change in Hungary, for a long time, there was a tendency that the government was pretty much announcing a lot of public tenders. So this market, this kind of segment of the market, was very much demand-driven. So basically, there were a lot of tenders. So new companies were emerging, not like mushrooms, but basically by the time of the second half of 2010s, we had already a lot of such type of policy research, policy analytical initiatives in form of firms, companies, institutes. And then basically in this last 5 to 8 years, we have seen a new structural change again, which is like, and here I am answering your question very long, but here I come with the answer that the government itself started to set up their own network of institutes and institutions. So basically there is this kind of duplication or privatization in a sense, or partization of the think tank market. So basically we have already, I would call them usually standard, in a standard way we would call them quasi-government organizations, but they pretty much are identified as almost independent ones, not directly linked with the government or with party affiliate, doesn't have a party affiliation, although by the funding or financing side, we see a lot of input of money, but there is this replication of expertise, and there is this replication of narratives and messages, which are then, competing for the public attention.
And so this is interesting because you've laid out quite nicely the political context and the way that particularly the role of the Budapest Institute has changed in this period of time as the context has changed, and also the relationship between the Budapest Institute and institutions like it with the government. Can you say something a little bit about the changing roles, therefore, of the think tanks that were part of your community maybe 10 years ago or a bit longer, and what roles they play today, right? If there is this group of quasi-governmental organizations or partisan organizations serving the government with the information they require or they want to use, what is the role that think tanks like yours are playing in Hungary?
It's a hard question because, to be honest, in some of these political segments of, let's call it, or market, we just exited. So we don't go for tendering, we don't put up our ideas. We are engaged with international projects which are covering not just Hungary, as I mentioned previously, but also other countries from the region. Especially, we have a lot of working relationship and good references with the international organizations like European Commission, ILO, different specified agencies of the UN, the OECD. So basically, I might not be the best person to give you the proper answer because our own strategy was not going into these potential conflicts, not exposing ourselves too much, but rather extending our own activities beyond Hungary. And again, so what we do know still in Hungary that we are very selective. So basically, if there is some policy issue which we think we have evidence to support a good argument, we just try to get to the public agenda by having a news article or a publication, or a podcast actually sometimes. But this is not systematic. It is more really highly selective in which issues we are highlighting ourselves and putting our ideas onto the sunlight.
And Petra, you mentioned this sort of, I would say, tension, because you also want to do a good work, but you're aware of the government priorities. If you look back, in 18 years, it's quite a long period of time. Congrats to sort of succeeding in these difficult circumstances. What did you think you did right, and where you think you could have done better? So, what worked in your strategy? What didn't work?
Again, coming back to the Hungarian context, in 2018, you might know that some of the local governments experienced some change in political career. So new political actors emerged, and they took at least the local government boards, new mayors coming from not the ruling party side, but from other political parties. So we have been we were very much frustrated about that we are here almost at the top of our intellectual cycle, but without any effective domestic impact. So we turned our face towards more to local level and stakeholders, both political and civil sector at the local level. So we try to explore that how far we can help still those actors who are pretty much engaged or interested in change, because whatever we do, policy analysis, policy research, evaluation, it is about change. And this is one of the biggest challenge, I think, that the policy institute can face, that how far you come up with good data, evidence, you analyze, but how does it turn into a change? So basically we were pretty much at the local level, be they political ones already sitting in local assemblies or even as peers, or civil society organizations active at local level. So this was one of the kind of reaction function we just followed. And then secondly, we also try to form some alliances or look for partners from the region who are aligned in these values we share, which is more about really implying or at least generating some policy change and also work with data. So basically this was these two impacts. I think I don't see much better alternatives in this situation, to be honest. I might miss the hindsight to see better alternatives, but yes, I would say if you put me in a time machine, I would still do the same, perhaps in this way of strategic reorientation. But could we have done other way? Good question. Still, it's something perhaps which comes to my mind is more perhaps about internal affairs of our organization. So it's less about these contextual challenges of political and market challenges we talked. So it is more about that how far we can not just strive to get to the impact we wish to have, but also to operate or institute for growing up new generation of researchers or political analysts. And this is a pretty much still challenge for us, that we are losing young and motivated, aspiring colleagues very, very quickly. So this is one of our biggest, I guess, institutional challenge. They might go outside. I mean, living in Hungary, they might go. Actually, this partly can be interpreted as a winning or a victory, that they might even. We had some junior colleagues who went into public authorities, working in ministry or working at local government, or even some of them turned to be politicians. But at the end of the day, we lost them. So it's a kind of, two sides of the same coin. We made them interested and motivated in public policy, but we haven't really. We have to introduce new colleagues again and again into our way of thinking and working operations, and it takes a lot of time. So perhaps we should have put a little bit more effort into this education and promotion of young colleagues within our institute.
Petra, can we maybe take a step a little bit back and describe the business model of the Budapest Institute? Because you've referred to tendering, which suggests that you're very much reliant on projects for the work that you do. You also have partners. Maybe the Budapest Institute is sort of set up, the kind of projects it does, whether it gets its income from consultancy projects, from grants, just to get a sense of the kind of organization you are.
Yeah, so we are pretty much a project-based institute. So we'll always go for tenders Most of them are definitely with partners. If it's a matter of scales. So if a policy project covers more than one country, it's definitely necessary to have the local experience and the local contacts and the local networks, which are delivered or even beneficial in case of having the partners from those countries. We are following up all the applications which are announced by the international organizations I just mentioned before. Sometimes we are generating new projects, but to be honest, this is very hazard. How far we may generate our own projects, because definitely if you are applying, you have to adjust and adapt the focus, the priorities, the topics, the method, the approach to those ones specified in that tender. But it's always like monitoring what is coming up and then mapping what kind of partners we can join with and then support in developing the basic project concept and ideas. We work in terms of colleagues, we work partly, half of our colleagues is more senior and half is, or sometimes a little less than half is junior colleagues. We have I would rather say a flat democratic decision-making process, which is like we have some rule of thumbs about what kind of projects we go for, and then we decide this always primarily with our senior colleagues together, but we always involve also the junior colleagues during the phase already of the application phase. And later on, people have a possibility to work along with one project or the other one. So there is this dynamic discussion with all the colleagues who would like to participate in the winning project. Help me, what should I highlight
for instance, have you ever benefited from grants that maybe have allowed you to...
Mixed. Yeah. Yes, it's very mixed. So most of the projects are rather service-based projects. In this term, they might involve some analytical and research tasks, but still they are service projects. But some of them are research projects, so grants in this sense. We also work and would also put some effort into capacity building projects, which were a mixture of policy research, but rather consultancy, but also sometimes more into going into training and education. Actually, with Goran's ex-colleagues, I had a longer term projects focusing on Hungarian civil society organizations and building their capacities in design, program design, and policy monitoring and evaluation. So in those projects, there might be a mix of grant and service fee and service support. But yes, regarding the proportions, I would say those type of education training driven projects are rather less than 10%. Research ones are around. It changes because they are long. Definitely research projects like we had from Horizon projects from the European Commission, they are 2 or 3 years long, but they are on average around 15-20%, and the rest is policy advice, consultancy or advisory project.
Yeah. And one of the challenges of project-based think tanks is then to bring it all together, right, into the communications campaign or engagement strategies that allow you to put together a single argument or just a few policy arguments and sustain that communication. How has the Budapest Institute addressed this challenge, especially in the current context where
Sorry, do you mean the sustainability of everything which we are?
No. I think one of the challenges of think tanks that are based on projects is to connect the projects into something that allows you to develop a cohesive policy argument, for example, right, that you can sustain over time. Right? If you want to work on SME development, right, you rely on having the projects coming your way to be able to build your evidence base to develop arguments on, the recommendations on SME development. So I'm just wondering how you've been able to bring those projects together into those sort of, maybe institutional messages or communication activities typical of think tanks. You were talking about a lot of the tender opportunities and project opportunities in Hungary kind of have dried out. You're relying mostly on foreign projects, foreign funded projects. Yeah. So I guess in that may add a bit of an extra layer of complexity in having the right projects to be able to develop, your policy arguments, the policy arguments you want to develop.
Yeah. Okay. Actually, our approach and basically definitely is our value fundamentals still pretty much in line with the more or less standard OECD or even the European Union approaches. So whatever we are concluding and then disseminating, we also use references to those projects previously done for those organizations. So basically, there is an accumulation. The proper answer to your question is, I think, this accumulation of our project evidences, which are perhaps can be used as the convincing argument. But as far as pretty much our clients are diffused, we don't have this very systematic approach in cohesive messaging because they are diffused. Mm-hmm. I think the more challenge for us, the more intriguing challenge is not whether it is cohesive with our own messages from 5 years or 6 years ago, but is rather that what happens after we are closing the project, even if we might have a discussion, even we might have a collaborative workshop closing as a closing moment of a specific policy project, but then change are beyond our control because this is something which those organizations who are taking on those messages have to establish and then start off. And I mean, you pretty much know, I know that OT was also engaging in such projects that how far program evaluations and impact assessments have really a change effect, or they miss to have the change effect. And to be honest, what we experience is that in many cases, even with those clients who are informed and open for discussion and even learning with an attitude of learning, whatever comes after an evaluation project is always about change management. And it is hard, because it's a very time and time-consuming exercise for any organization to start changing their operations, to start to revise their own visions of the program. So, and this is totally, out of very specific evaluation projects, what happens next after you deliver. So basically, I would claim this is more interesting for us, that how far we can help them to start those change, institution change, policy change, after we have been said all what we could have said based on data and evidence. And I think it is also more challenging for those who are requiring these analytical approaches.
And that also having in mind that those even constructive especially international organizations and partners are operating with the government that it's semi-collaborative at best, I would say. So that's also we have to take into consideration and how much they have to and they can change. Petra, I want to ask you something more. We touched upon, but I really would like to go deeper. There's the two prongs of my question. One is we touched a bit about the institutes that are created. I mean, here on OTT, we covered actually for a long time ago the Matthias Corvinus Collegium,
Yes.
And suddenly that name is known across Europe, although for people like us who follow the scene and who follow Hungary, it was clear when they passed the 1 billion euros endowment and so on. But how does it affect? Because, this is a lavishly funded state-sponsored institutions, and their analysis probably can overwhelm everything else. That's one thing when I ask you. And the second prong is, Relatively recently, you wrote this policy brief about the availability of data and access. And one thing what we know by now in illiberal democracies, as they label them, is that the data becomes very contested, or rather the quality of data.
Yes.
Even in the United States these days, when more and more actors in the policy field do not trust the data that comes from the state institutions or from institutions that there is a sort of a suspicion that the state controls and doctors those numbers. So if you can talk more about this sort of state sanctions, I mean, on one hand, the research and the centers like Matthias Corvinus Collegium, and as well the data that is the essential material for any think tank, especially economic think.
Yeah, thank you very much. The MCC is a very sensitive topic by now. Actually, we have, it's an anecdote story, but one of our colleagues was just invited to visit on the thematic whatever panel, so policy panel, organized by the MCC. And we had a long discussion and sort of debate in-house whether we should join that panel or not. At the end of the day, it seems we don't join it. Okay, and there are basically two reasons behind. The one is it is pretty hard to know that there is a trade-off between keeping public policy debate open, and diverse, but at the same time, with your presence, you legitimize institutions, and you have them legitimizing their own activities, which on the other side can be very tricky, because yes, MCC has a lot of funds. MCC is also working with actually very motivated and talented young people. They are also looking very systematically for collaborations and cooperations with international organizations like the OECD as well. So they are doing a lot of proactive steps about raising their professional reputation, but at the same time, it is not very clear regarding the outputs, that how far these are really independent researches and independent outputs, and how far they are still manipulated, or sometimes not explicitly but implicitly putting in line arguments which are coming from political actors. So this kind of fuzziness about their operations disturbs everyone who would value, the basic value of openness, whatever academic research or applied research you are talking about. It's very hard, to be honest. So we had a very long discussion, and we ended up not giving the mandate to our colleague to participate in that panel because of this fear of political, not well-founded political legitimation. The other argument was that basically in Hungary, we have an upcoming elections in April, as expected. So the political campaign period is already full-fledged going on, and stigmatization of your views, even if it's supported or underlined about policy issues with data and evidence, the risk of stigmatization is also very high. So basically, you can end up, or expectation is that if you are visiting any of those events or whatever, you make your voice louder regarding or in relation with those quasi-government organizations, there is a risk that you might end up stigmatized as an opposition party or whatever, holding their views, which is again unnecessary. This is a burden, and it definitely has a chilling effect on everyone. And this is not a good tendency that these expectations are there, because this goes against the wishes of all of us, to discuss openly about public problems, public puzzles, public policy problems, public policy puzzles, which are never clear-cut. There is no optimal solution for any public policy problem. There is always pro and cons. So basically only debates, well-organized, moderated, and open and diverse debates can help to come to a point when experts interested in the issue, stakeholders engaged in the policy field, might come up with a consensus. So yes, it was again a very long answer. I'm sometimes answering those questions of yours. I feel like I'm skating, ice skating, trying to keep the balance and being fair. But you understand my point, I guess.
Yes, and I think in reference to that ice skating image, I was thinking of a tightrope that you've described throughout the interview. Kind of always there are sort of threats and opportunities or risks, and how to manage them. And Goran and I have been sort of wondering what effect running think tanks, leading think tanks in these contexts have on the individuals themselves. So we want to ask you a little bit about that. What has been the impact of running the Budapest Institute on you as an individual? And maybe by thinking about what has been the best part, and if you want the worst part or the most difficult part of being a leader of a think tank in Hungary over the last 18 years.
I come back to this, but I just want to give one answer to Goran's second question. We just skipped.
Sorry.
So data availability and data quality. There is a definitely worsening trend. So access to data is getting very challenging. The data quality was never really high level. And, again, the purpose of collecting data is the activity by the government and public authorities collecting data should be the purpose. So if the purpose, again, is not clear-cut, if the purpose is intermingling with other than economic motivations or goals, then the data will be not good. Again, so more openness and more transparency about why government do collect data and what this data will be used for could help the best to improve the data quality as well. Okay, best thing still, freedom. So both personal freedom and also intellectual freedom. Again, we are pretty much working in a type of workshop-like. So we always do our stuff in groups, in teams, in discussion with each other. So this kind of existence that you have partners with whom you can share your ideas openly and then discuss and not taking the risk of figuring out the project challenge by your own, because you have partners here. To be honest, I have never started this by myself. So it is for me very, very assuring that we started it 4 people together, and now we have still those people along with us and even more. So this kind of collaborative, free, open and flexible environment, I think this is the best. Have you asked about the negative side too?
Yeah, what has been hardest or most difficult about?
We spoke about that. So actually we are, I think, okay, I do it in a personal statement. So I really feel like I am at the top of my intellectual performative cycle. And definitely our impact is, we consider or we perceive our policy impact is much, much smaller and shrunken as compared it could have been in a different democratic institutional context.
Yeah, I get that.
Thanks, Petra. As we're sort of moving towards the conclusion of this interview, we talked a lot about the past. We would like to ask at least a couple of questions about the future. If you look at the future and the future of Hungary, Visegrad, the various think tank scenes, in your view, what's the direction of travel of organizations like yours and other think tanks in these 3 settings in which you operate, Hungary and Europe?
Could you repeat again?
What is the direction of travel? What the future would bring for things in these 3 different settings? If you had a crystal ball, or maybe not a crystal ball, but
exactly.
to look a bit at the future of this type of organizations.
I don't think we can see the future, to be honest. Personally, I think that everything is so in dizziness that it is very hard. But we are doing basically, okay, at the operational level, we are really planning by contingencies. So what kind of external event can change the trajectory of, we are thinking and mapping this. what kind of change of events, definitely political ones, first of all, can fundamentally change the operational context of our institute, and at least have a plan B if those contingencies are realizing. So that's my answer, that yes, still planning and contingency planning, what we do. But secondly, based on the experience we had, still, I'm going back again to the past, but I think the past might give you some insight regarding managing the future. Our experience was that we should keep, our commitment to the values we started with. You just have to be, consistent in the beliefs and in the commitments you made when you started this type of enterprise, because this is an enterprise, very, in a Schumpeterian sense, it is an enterprise. So we started the Budapest Institute, that we would like to deliver quality research, applied research, not academic, but applied policy research. We would like to have whatever impact we have as far as we can get, and we never compromise regarding our operations. So we keep our integrity, but pretty much. We never go into black business or, mutual beneficially good businesses, whatever. So to be honest, it paid off. So I really think, and it's also anecdotal story perhaps, that I encounter people and having discussions about the fact that we are working and we are in operation in Budapest, like Budapest Institute. They also ask us or ask me that, oh yeah, you really, perhaps, I'm sure you had some kind of projects which you just took on board, but you never did, that it was a service for others, or, and I said, actually not. And we don't. And you should really have a core funding behind you. No, we don't have. So, and there is a, how do you say that? There is a doubt that basically business can be done properly, which is amazing for me, because it can be done well. And I think that's the best strategy to face the future, because you don't have the magic ball, you don't see it. You don't see when public attitudes are shifting radically. You don't see when the next crisis event will come. You just stick to the practices and to the commitments and beliefs you had before. And yes, this consistency, I think, is the best asset we can meet the I think very easy future.
Petra, I think that's also a very great piece of advice for anybody who is working in or is planning to start a think tank. Stick to your principles, because it's the one thing you can control, right? In a rapidly changing context and an unpredictable context.
Yeah.
And with this, thank you very much. This has been a really interesting conversation. I'm really glad I got a chance to talk to you again after all these years. I hope it doesn't take that long again to have another interesting discussion about think tanks and public policy. Thank you, Goran, and everybody who's listening. You can listen to this and other episodes of this series wherever you listen to your podcast, or by visiting onthinktanks.org. From Goran and from me, goodbye.